It's kinda crazy to think how a huge amount of TV shows that Marvel has produced were left unresolved and ended up being very short-lived. One such show was Wolverine and The X-Men, which isn't only a short-lived series, it's also one of the best TV shows based on Marvel comics that we have seen, with great performances, a lively comic book-inspired art style, and compelling writing that made you heavily invested in all of the different storylines and characters the series introduced. It honestly surprised me how mature and dark this show was willing to get, given that its main premise was about Wolverine reuniting the X-Men after they all disbanded, following a great explosion which caused the disappearances of Jean Grey and Professor X. And these are the X-Men at their lowest point yet. But beyond these issues, they also had to prevent an apocalyptic possible future from happening, inspired by the classic comic storyline Days of Future Past. All of these elements made for a really engaging season of television, but what's heartbreaking about the show is that after this story, they were going to adapt Age of Apocalypse, teased in the very last scene of the very last episode of Season 1. Something that sounded insanely cool, but that unfortunately never ended up happening. But one has to wonder, why? Why was the show cancelled? What planned ideas they had for the show's future? So this is what I've been doing recently. I rewatched this entire amazing show, and later researched every old interview from the show's staff and articles on its developments that I could find, in order to break down everything that's been revealed on its potential Season 2, to make a series retrospective, and just as a way to pay my respects to every great creative mind that worked on this fantastic show. With that being said, sit down, relax, grab yourself something to drink or eat, and let's explore Wolverine and the X-Men's very interesting early development, unused characters, and its cancelled Season 2 plans that we never got to see. During the mid-2000s, Marvel became interested in starting development on a new X-Men animated series that would focus on Wolverine as the protagonist, to take advantage of the character's massive popularity. The production of the series itself would be financed through a joint venture between First Serve International and Toons Animation, with the two companies working very closely with Marvel throughout its development. The series was worked on by many talented writers and artists, but its main showrunners were Greg Johnson and Craig Kyle, who was actually Vice President of Creative Development at Marvel at the time, and both of them were writers and producers with years of experience working on previous Marvel series. They had even worked on the last animated series, X-Men Evolution. During an old 2007 IGN interview with Craig Kyle, he reflected on his past experience working on X-Men Evolution, and how that series' high school reimagining concept impeded them from translating many classic elements from the comics that they wanted to adapt. With this new Wolverine-centric show, they tried to strike a balance between the emotion, drama, and grounded character work from Evolution, along with the classic stories and more traditional elements from X-Men comics that fans wanted to see. And I personally believe they really succeeded. Joshua Fine is another great writer and producer with credits on many Marvel shows, such as Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and he also worked as an associate producer and writer on Wolverine and the X-Men. During an interview with Marvel Animation Age, he said that the series was carefully planned out from the beginning. Greg Johnson and Craig Kyle had already thought of many ideas they'd go on to use in Wolverine and the X-Men all the way back in 2005. The show's first season was already mostly planned out, and they had already thought of most of its major developments, such as the Phoenix reveal or the Inner Circle working behind the shadows with Emma Frost. They essentially wrote the story backwards and made sure to play out the mystery in an engaging way, aiming to make the show feel like an epic journey with a heavy emphasis on continuity. Although they did try to balance this focus on its larger story arc with more self-contained single episodes that diverted from the main story. And this is a surprisingly dark series that shows us the X-Men and mutant kind at their lowest point. The mutant persecution has increased to an all-time high thanks to the government support of the Mutant Response Division. The X-Men have also disbanded after a great explosion destroyed the Xavier Institute, and some characters like Cyclops are still deeply depressed. A year after the X-Men split up, Wolverine was telepathically contacted by Charles Xavier, who had woken up in a horrible distant future where Earth was turned into a desolate wasteland, as a result of a huge mutant persecution that got out of control and left the entire planet in ruins, with the surviving mutants being hunted down by Sentinels. After learning this, Wolverine starts reuniting the X-Men to try to prevent this dark future from happening. It's a very interesting premise that sparks curiosity in the audience, and it makes us believe a scenario where an unlikely loner like Wolverine has to step up and act as a true leader for the first time. There's no denying that Wolverine is always pushed as the protagonist in most X-Men adaptations simply because he's one of Marvel's most popular characters of all time. But I still like that they put a lot of thought into coming up with a story that has Wolverine being placed as a leader in an organic and understandable way. As opposed to X-Men Evolution, which was mostly a reimagining of the X-Men coming from a teen drama approach, this series overall aimed to be more faithful to the comics. The main overarching storylines were adaptations of iconic comic book stories. In the present day, they did a loose adaptation of the Dark Phoenix saga. And in the future, they told a story heavily inspired by Days of Future Past. But instead of Kitty Pryde traveling back in time to warn the X-Men, it had Professor X sending time messages as warnings. Beyond that, we can also feel this show's adherence to the comics with how most X-Men had their traditional characterizations, for the most part. Some characters did kinda get screwed over, like Cyclops, who a lot of people believed wasn't portrayed in an accurate way, and even some members of the show's staff had issues with the direction they chose to take him for the series. The visual design for Wolverine and the X-Men also looks great. It has a simple yet appealing art style that easily lends itself for animation, allowing for some great action scenes. And they had designs that more closely resembled the comics, with a lot of them having a small resemblance to how they looked in the astonishing X-Men title that was published during the mid-2000s. They also made sure to adapt many iconic elements from X-Men lore, like an episode that focused on how Cyclops joined the X-Men and showed the classic lineup with their first-class Silver Age suits, or how they directly adapted storylines from Wolverine's past, like his backstory with Weapon X, which he still doesn't fully remember, his history in Japan with Mariko Yashida, or his confrontation with the Hulk, one of the best episodes of the entire show. Besides comic book influences, we also can't ignore how much this show took from the Fox X-Men movies, such as Logan and Rogue having a closer father-daughter type relationship, Mystique going undercover as a government official, and Wolverine being so damn tall, which is just wrong. Almost as wrong as making him Australian.
Fräulein, you left before I could properly welcome you.
Welcome her? Wait, she's not joining the X-Men, is she? She's just a kid.
And there's a really interesting conversation with Joshua Fine that was hosted by YouTube channel Chainsaw Reacts. And I'm gonna leave a link for it just in case you want to check it out, because it's actually very interesting. But there, he said that he specifically chose Hulk to be the only Marvel character from outside the X-Men mythos to feature on the series because of how important he is in Wolverine's history, since the character debuted in a Hulk comic fighting against him, and this episode also places Wolverine and the X-Men in a larger shared continuity with other Marvel projects from the 2000s. For those of you who don't know, this show is often considered to be a part of the Yostverse, an animated Marvel universe coined after producer and writer Christopher Yost, who's a prolific writer that worked on most Marvel animated projects throughout the 2000s, something that connected series like Spectacular Spider-Man, Avengers EMH, and Wolverine and the X-Men. Besides those three shows, there are also other animated movies that also usually get included in this shared universe. In Hulk vs. Wolverine, for example, Wolverine is voiced by Steve Blum, who's one of the best actors that have portrayed the character, and he also played Wolverine on this show. This is significant because the events of this movie were directly referenced in the aforementioned Hulk episode.
Hulk, remember.
They didn't use any other Marvel guest character besides Hulk, since they wanted to focus on the X-Men as much as possible, which was a good choice because the show's cast was huge. The X-Men roster by the end of season 1 had like 11 or 12 members, and some characters already felt a little underdeveloped. Fine said that S.H.I.E.L.D. did feel like an aspect of the larger Marvel universe that could have returned organically into the story, but they didn't find the right opportunity to bring them back by the time the show was cancelled. Wolverine and the X-Men managed to last for 26 fantastic episodes that kept advancing its multiple stories in satisfying ways. The show did a great job at keeping the audience engaged in two different storylines at the same time. The season finale deals with the climax of both main conflicts. In the present, the X-Men are dealing with the Inner Circle trying to unleash the Phoenix Force from within Jean, and Magneto forcing a war between mutants and humans, while in the future, Charles Xavier and the future X-Men reunite with Wolverine and finally fight against Master Mold. Wolverine is also with a group of multiple X-23s, which is pretty sick. And having an active Professor X that can actually move is fun. It's something that allows for stories that we normally don't get to see from him. However, as we mentioned previously, the thing the show is mostly remembered for nowadays is one particular cliffhanger. And this show's last episode ended up teasing that its second season was going to adapt the Age of Apocalypse storyline from the comics, something that would have been just beautiful to see, but just wasn't meant to be. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Age of Apocalypse, in the comics it was a story about Legion, the son of Charles Xavier, going back in time to kill Magneto, but he ended up accidentally killing Xavier instead before he founded the X-Men. This created a new timeline where no one was there to stop Apocalypse from dominating the world. So while in Season 1 we saw a world where mutants were defeated and were horribly oppressed, in Season 2 we were going to see a world where mutants are the oppressors and rule with an iron fist. Visually, the show's tease for this storyline seemed spot on, although had they gotten the chance to fully explore this story they would have had to do some changes. For example, in the comics they showed this new reality as an alternate present timeline, but in the show they were going to depict it as an alternate future they had to stop from occurring, just like the Days of Future Past inspired story from Season 1. And there are other minor elements which would have been reworked, like how in the OG comic event, Cyclops was raised by Mr. Sinister since he was a child to be Apocalypse's lackey, but for the show it seemed like they were going to reveal how something eventually happened which made Cyclops turn evil and join Apocalypse in the future. According to Joshua Fine, by the time the show ended they didn't get too far into Season 2's production. There wasn't any animation work done for it, but they had done a lot of character designs and finished scripts, with even a completed series bible that plotted out the entire overarching storyline. And there were many plot threads left unresolved throughout Season 1 which were going to be followed up on. For instance, by the end of the show, Wolverine also hadn't fully learned about his entire past with the Weapon X program, something that was also meant to be followed up on during Season 2. And during the show, there was also an episode where Mr. Sinister kidnapped Jean Grey and Cyclops in order to steal their genetic material, something that was clearly teasing the debut of Cable on the show. And just take a look at these designs they had made for him. They were really going to introduce him in Season 2, and Sinister himself was of course going to have an even larger role. During an old Comic-Con panel, the show's crew themselves actually shared with fans many designs they were working on, and there have been many other Season 2 concept art leaked and shared online over the years that give us an idea as to how these characters were gonna be revamped. Like, take a look at how savage Wolverine was gonna look in the Age of Apocalypse future. It's pretty faithful to how he looked in the original event. The same thing can be said for the future versions of Sabretooth and also Colossus, who was actually considered to appear in Season 1 but they couldn't do it since they had already introduced too many characters for the main X-Men roster, so he was gonna be joining the team in Season 2, just like other new characters like his sister Magic, Jubilee, or Havoc. Also, take a look at this unused Jean Grey design with her 80s costume. I honestly like it a lot more than her final suit for the series. We also have designs for some new villains they were gonna use, like Holocaust. But one very interesting detail that Joshua Fine has shared on interviews in the past is that the show's crew had actually fully finished writing the first 8 episodes of Season 2. And years ago, around 2013, there was a Save the X-Men Facebook page that actually leaked a lot of official material for the second season. And that page specifically uploaded 8 scripts for unproduced episodes, just like Joshua Fine had said. I only mention this because, while we don't know exactly how this Facebook page got a hand of these scripts and concept art, there is a very high chance that these scripts are legit, especially since their plots have been described pretty accurately by other series writers in previous interviews. So these do seem to be like the official first 8 episodes we were gonna see had the show continued. Season 2 was gonna start with a 3-episode storyline titled A New Order. In the present, we would have seen Cyclops come out of his depression and take a more active role in the team, giving Logan suggestions on how to be a leader. Part 1 would have had Archangel stealing Xavier's comatose body on behalf of Mr. Sinister in the present, and Xavier in the future trying to understand how this Age of Apocalypse timeline came to be. Part 2 is mostly set in the present, and shows the MRD stepping up its mutant persecution with a new operation called Zero Tolerance, persecuting mutants on a global scale now. And it shows Magneto hiding in Japan at his lowest point after allowing Genosha to be attacked as a ploy to start a war, and sacrificing his own mutant population in the process, with him ending the episode allowing himself to be captured in order to save a young mutant named Shiro and send him to the X-Men. This Operation Zero Tolerance they mentioned is a reference to the title of an event storyline published in the X-Men titles during 1997, which showed Bastion using its newly constructed Prime Sentinels to massively attack mutants across the country with full government support. And given that there's Bastion concept art for Season 2, it seems like they were eventually going to adapt the story for the show. The storyline has been adapted outside the comics since then, but it ended up happening years later during the recently released X-Men 97. Part 3 would have shown flashbacks to how Sinister tried to capture Shiro, showing Sinister creating a new type of Sentinel. And a scene in this episode between Beast and Wolverine would have shown Beast suggesting to Logan that maybe it's time for someone with more leadership skills to lead the X-Men. Also, this young kid they introduced is actually Shiro Yashida, the younger brother of Mariko Yashida, and a mutant who goes on to become Sunfire. We actually have concept art for how he would have looked like once he fully became Sunfire in the alternate timeline. Episode 4, titled Infinite Future, would have been mostly set in the future, with the X-Men trying to reclaim Cerebro from Apocalypse. And given that Xavier, upon hearing that Apocalypse was the ruler of this new universe, immediately thought about trying to reach the X-Men in the past to warn them, and tried to prevent Apocalypse from reaching power. It also would have introduced new characters like Callisto, Lucid, and Gazer. Magneto would be shown as the leader of the X-Men in this future, and a team comprised of him, Quicksilver, Sabretooth, Mystique, Blink, Colossus, Professor Xavier, and Sunfire. Unus the Untouchable would have also made his debut in this episode as a member of the Pale Riders, a group of assassins working for Apocalypse. Although Xavier mentions that the X-Men needed to find a way of communicating with Logan in the present once again, just like he had done in Season 1, Joshua Fine said during his interview with Chainsaw Reacts that they wanted to cut communications between the two time periods moving forward. Recall was the title of the 5th episode. Set in the present, it would have shown Weapon X sending X-23 to attack the Xavier Institute and capture Wolverine, with him later sending Deadpool as well. The ending of the episode would have revealed that Apocalypse was the one behind the Weapon X program after all, tying Wolverine's personal storyline with the larger arc of the season. Another interesting thing to note is that we were only going to see one main X-23 instead of a whole team of her, since, if you recall, during an episode of Season 1 we actually saw X-23 in the Days of Future Past timeline, where they showed that Wolverine rescued an entire team of multiple X-23 clones. During an interview though, Joshua Fine said that the multiple X-23 clones that we saw in that future wouldn't have reappeared on Season 2, since by the end of the first season they had successfully altered the course of events, that Days of Future Past potential future wouldn't happen, and instead it was changed for a new possible future. While they were working on Season 1, already knowing that the timeline was going to change in the end allowed the writers to go crazy with ideas that didn't need to be followed up on, and the multiple X-23 clones were only meant to be used during those Season 1 episodes. X-23 herself was also going to have a more prominent role in the main cast had the series continued. This script for episode 5 also suggests that Logan already knew Deadpool before, once again confirming that Hulk vs. Wolverine did take place in the same continuity. Episode 6 was titled Russian Magic, and it's another episode mostly set in the present, where Sinister would have tried to kidnap Colossus' little sister, Illyana, making him request the X-Men for help, and the episode ends with Colossus finally rejoining the team. Following this, we would have seen an episode titled Legacy, where Wolverine would team up with the Brotherhood to stop the production of a mutant cure. And finally, the last script we have is for an episode titled Exodus, in which the MRD would invade Genosha, causing Wanda to teleport its mutant population to Mount Wundagore. During a 2011 interview, Joshua Fine commented that they planned on having Xavier finally wake up from his coma during Season 2's finale. Throughout Season 2, they also would have shown Jean Grey indicating signs that Emma Frost was actually a part of her, explaining that Emma didn't fully die, since her consciousness had been transferred to Jean's mind after her diamond form was shattered, with Jean slowly realizing this, and them later adapting a scene from Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, where Beast reformed Emma from her shattered diamond form. During an interview with Metinist.com, Joshua Fine revealed that they were considering fully confirming the connection between Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Wolverine and the X-Men, given that he had begun working on the early development for EMH while he was also working on Season 2 of Wolverine and the X-Men. He mentions ideas for some crossover episodes, like Wolverine going on a Black Ops mission with Hawkeye and Black Widow when they were still S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, and another episode where Hank McCoy would visit Hank Pym. with these being the EMH versions of these characters. Season 1's Higher Grounds also left an opening for a future follow-up story, since Mojo promised to take revenge on the X-Men, so he might have returned in the series' future. Angel's turn into Archangel and minion of Mr. Sinister was also left unresolved, and we likely would have seen some kind of resolution to that storyline. Fine also said that, while they never seriously laid down any future plans beyond Season 2, they did talk about the possibility of doing House of M as their following big story arc. It's something that would have built organically since Wanda was already an important character on the show. Another possibility they considered was simply not doing a story revolving around trying to prevent yet another alternate timeline. And given that they had already fleshed out the show's world to the point that they could have easily continued just telling stories set in its present time. Finally, Fine said that he also would have probably considered adapting Onslaught had the show continued, who in the comics was a psychic entity formed after Professor X came into direct contact with Magneto's mind during the fight, which led to Magneto's worst negative traits being merged with Xavier's worst traits, with this fusion later gaining awareness and laying dormant in Xavier's subconsciousness until it eventually figured out how to escape from the mental plane into the real world and gain a physical form. Onslaught is a really cool concept for an endgame type villain, since his storyline escalated to the point that even the Avengers and Fantastic Four had to join the X-Men in order to stop him. It's a story that X-Men shows and movies haven't adapted yet, and it could serve as a really interesting threat for them to fight against. Ultimately, Wolverine and the X-Men Season 2 ended up being cancelled during its early development due to financial issues. In an interview with Inverse, series director and character designer Stephen E. Gordon stated that back then, Marvel wasn't in charge of financing its own shows, which is why the series was produced as a joint venture between First Serve International and Toons Animation. According to Gordon, both parties couldn't agree on important decisions, like who would give the larger percentage of the money towards its budget, who would own the bigger percentage of the series, and so forth, with the two companies simply not being able to work out a deal that would satisfy them both, resulting in the show being definitively cancelled. This was a massive shame. It always hurts a lot when a really good show gets cancelled after only one season, but it's even worse when that season ends on a very promising cliffhanger, and it's a lot worse when it's a comic book adaptation since we already have an idea of what the story was gonna be. Age of Apocalypse is an awesome storyline that deserves to be adapted, and this show truly deserved a better treatment than how it was handled by its production companies. I think I can safely say that the majority of fans are currently very happy with X-Men 97, and it's a blessing to see the 90s show get revived in such a high quality way. But I think most of us would also be open to the idea of Wolverine and the X-Men getting revived in the future as well. Especially since a lot of people who watched the series as kids are now adults and there's a lot of nostalgia for it. The same thing can be said about Evolution, but honestly, between the two shows, I'd prefer to see Wolverine and the X-Men get revived, simply because it was left far more unresolved than Evolution, which got 4 entire seasons. But still, even if we don't get to see any kind of continuation for neither one of these shows, I'm still very grateful that they were made at all, even if they were abruptly cancelled and deserved more. But that's only my opinion. What do you think about all this? Would you like to see Wolverine and the X-Men get some kind of revival? What did you think about all of these planned ideas for the show's future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching.